All right. Thanks a lot, Rosalia. Thanks, colleagues, for joining the call. I think we can start in the interest of time. My name is Eric Kinaga. I am a programs manager at Tisa, and I wish to welcome you to this inaugural webinar that intends to analyze the Azimio Manifesto, as has been previously shared. And we, as you are aware, I think we're at a very critical juncture as a country, with the cost of living and the debt rising. And so this conversation comes at a time when I believe citizens, fellow citizens, would want to hear what the future looks like. Many of us are apprehensive about the state of our current economy, the rise in unemployment, and especially the rising cost of living as a result of the debt crisis that we are in. But it is important to hold this conversation and many others that will be happening as we go along. And one of the things that we've learned over the last 10 years is that politicians actually implement the manifestos. And so if this holds, then it is important for us to have this discussion. So we'll be discussing this and a bit more in the next few hours. And so it is my honor to introduce the panel of the panelists, the distinguished panelists in our midst, who will be taking us through some of the issues. And for the moderation of that session, I will now invite Wanjiru Gikonyo, the National Coordinator at Tisa, to take us through this session, the highlights of what the program will be like, and also introduce our panelists this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you to our panelists. And a little bit, maybe just a brief note that we had a bit of a conflicting time. So one of our panelists unfortunately didn't get the update and will be joining us at past. So apologies for that. But thank you so much for joining us. I'll very briefly speak to why we are here, and then proceed to introduce our panelists. As you're aware, Kenya is in a serious economic crisis, and we've been working around this work as TISA through the Okoa Uchumi Coalition. As TISA, this area is of interest to us because our mission and objective is to help Kenyans find their voice and agency, to claim their right to services, to make government accountable for its duties and promises, and ultimately make the Constitution a lived experience. And in the course of our work, particularly on devolution, we found that the issue of public debt had frustrated the ability of government to fund devolved services. And if you recall, in 2018, 2019, there was a major standoff, and we had a very prolonged strike in 2019 that forced even the Council of Governors to go to court, as there was a big contestation about the share, the division of revenue. We then got involved in this. We went to court, and when we were doing our analysis of the situation, we realized the problem was what government was calling national interest, that government had been putting large amounts of money into national interest projects, and these projects were funded through public debt. And this public debt, in turn, was eating on the revenue that government was raising. So instead of being able to put money into devolution, into public services, social services, it was going to repay debt. And we therefore got very involved in this issue. We've run the Okoa Uchumi campaign, and under that platform, we decided to get engaged in what we are calling election agenda setting. where we felt it was important to engage with political actors, to share our expectations around good governance, and particularly the resolution of Kenya's economic situation. In doing this, we generated a manifesto, and Rosalia was trying to show the clip of the launch event of the manifesto. And our manifesto identifies a number of issues for action by government. It identifies the need to deal decisively, of course, with the debt crisis. It identifies the need to ensure strong governance through through access to information and transparency, through effective oversight. It also identifies the need for tax justice, transparency, and accountability. So we identified the issues of governance as key to the effective resolution of Kenya's economic problems. So as part of the election agenda setting, we also took an interest in looking at the manifestos. We were not able to convene this particular session under the Okoa Uchumi due to time constraints in mobilizing, but we decided as Tisa to proceed to invite a few experts who could help us think through the manifesto, which I know many of us have either read or watched various conversations around. So our intention today is to unpack the manifesto, to look at the Azimio Manifesto. It's our intention to also look at the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto, and to look at the extent to which it is aligned to the promise it makes. We, of course, are excited by the language when they talk about economic transformation, social transformation, good governance. This is language that we resonate with. But we also are very aware that since the 90s, government has been using very attractive catchphrases. In the 90s, it was the catchphrase of reform. In the early 2000s, it was the catchphrase of anti-corruption. With the passage of the Constitution, the catchphrase was implementation of the Constitution. So we are asking ourselves, is economic revolution, social transformation, these promises being made by the Azimio Manifesto, are they simply catchphrases, or are there truly transformative proposals in the manifesto? And if they are, then what should we do as civil society, as citizens, to claim those promises and to hold government accountable should they ascend to power? And if they are good ideas, they are ideas that we should still ask ourselves, how do we take them forward? So in inviting our experts, we've invited them to help us unpack the manifesto, to give us a deeper understanding of some of these terms and some of the thinking behind it, to look at some of the gaps, disconnects, maybe the overpromises. But really here, we are trying to interrogate the extent to which, as Kenya and as an African country, we are beginning to speak to those aspects of our development that have kept Africa held behind, that have perpetuating inequality, so that we can elevate our thinking and inform our actions. And to do this, we've been joined by a very distinguished panel, and I'm very grateful that they were able to join us. And I'll just, I really hadn't thought how to do the introduction. I'll keep it quite, I'll try not to be too wordy, because they have very, very illustrious careers. Maybe I'll start with Dr. Steve Ouma, who is a senior lecturer at Kenyatta University, I have also met him at the Center for Social Transformation of Tangaza University, where he also has a critical role. And he tells us that his interests are in ethnography, urban studies, pedagogy of humanities, social life of human rights, and discourse of modernity bridges. He has 20 years combined experience in research, policymaking, management, and teaching. He has strong skills in legal, social science, and writing, program development, policy, human rights advocacy, government and civil society liaison, international relations, community, animation and ethnography, human rights and social justice conceptualization and designing. In his earlier life, Dr. Steve Ouma was at the helm of the Kenya Human Rights Commission. So he hails from civil society. So Steve, it's a pleasure to have you with us. We are very honored to have you with us. And so that we can break the monotony of my voice, I will ask that you kindly make your opening remarks with my lengthy introduction. And by way of opening remarks, we had sent a question to the panelists, asking them, please comment on the most transformative aspect of the manifesto, if any, because we may be assuming that there is, and provide a brief justification of why you find that to be the most transformative aspect. If none, explain why you feel there is no transformative aspect to the manifesto. A couple of minutes to kindly make that introduction. So Dr. Steve Ouma, kindly give us your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Wanjiru, and thanks to all of you for being here and indeed for inviting me to this conversation. And also, of course, thank you for the generous introduction. Allow me to start, before speaking to the manifesto, to just take 1 minute to also comment on your own framing of where we are at as a country now. I think that your framing is quite good, but I want to request that we layer it a bit with history, which you mentioned towards the end. And I think the history for me would be, let's peg the history to elections. And I would say we have the end of Moi regime. And when Kibaki was coming in, this country had sunk so low, and the movement at the end of Moi's time was poverty alleviation or poverty eradication. And we argued that what is poverty alleviation and poverty eradication? And the economic framework that was brought in by the Kibaki regime, and Professor Nyang' Nyong'o worked a lot around that, was wealth creation as a subcomponent of alleviation. And you remember the economic recovery strategy, and I'm so glad that I was part of that writing and framing. And you see that proceeding in the entire Kibaki regime. That's where you have the economic stimulus. That's where you have expansion of infrastructure as an enabler. So in Kibaki regime, we move away from this high potential, low potential area, and infrastructure is seen as an enabler for the entire economy. And then we have Uhuru One, which comes at a time when we have the new constitution, and that's devolution. And the key thing, you remember, we had a big debate with the Revenue Allocation Commission, and I remember really the role of Tisa, among other civil society members, on what is a formula for revenue allocation? How about affirmative action? Of course, we have always argued, and it's still the case, that the Revenue Allocation Commission is fairly lazy. They have refused to think about the questions of equity, the questions of equality, and therefore they always give us minimalistic formula. But that's been the question of Uhuru One, apart from the many promises they give of be it laptops, be it stadiums, be it title deeds, and so on. But Uhuru One was really a movie showbiz moment, apart from devolution. Movie showbiz moment, many promises, and miracle thinking. And who was the role model? The role model was Ethiopia. If you remember, they brought in the Prime Minister of Ethiopia during the inauguration. They said, look, Ethiopia has a double-digit economy. We will give you double digits. Of course, it's not happened because they didn't take into account the fact that Ethiopia limited democracy for it to expand the opportunities that they are displaying. Now, then we have, of course, Uhuru II, which is nuanced with the problem of handshake. Initially, Uhuru II came with the promise of the so-called five visionary agenda, which was going to be a good thing because it was going to focus on housing, it was going to focus on technology, and so on. And remember, because if you remember what happened in Kibaki 1, when Kibaki made education free, education became accessible. So if Uhuru 1 would have delivered, Uhuru 2 would have delivered, for example, massive housing, that would have been something that would be useful. So that history is important because then what I see happening now is that all key political actors have raised the question of economy as the question. But I argue that the question is not quite economy. The question is the role of the market vis-a-vis liberal democracy and the ability of the market to distribute the outcomes of growth. That's a key question in my opinion. And it's not unique to Kenya. This is a crisis of the United States in 2008, 2009, 2010, when they realized that the market cannot be trusted to distribute economic outcomes. So even if you do huge investments in infrastructure and you think the market with this so-called efficiency, freedom will distribute to everybody, it doesn't. It doesn't distribute. So governance comes in. So when you comment about public debt, I think the question to start with is not debt, because if you look at it, in my opinion, Kenya ranks number what in Africa in terms of debt? Number 18. We're just 1 inch below South Africa. South Africa is 19, and South Africa has done very well with its borrowing. Rwanda is higher than Kenya. Rwanda is number, I think number top, quite top there. Let me just see in my statistics. Rwanda is number 12. And if you see what Rwanda is doing, I'm doing a project in Rwanda now, and I've seen what they're doing in the secondary cities. So borrowing and expanding debt ceiling is a problem, but I think we need to think a little bit more whether it is the problem in totality or there is a governance element into that problem. The last comment I want to make on that context question is the rising cost of living. 5 days ago, there were public demonstrations in London. And the public demonstrations in London were about high cost of living. So we cannot be able to diagnose Kenyan situation without looking at global locality and globalization, and ask ourselves, are there certain questions that are manifest in Kenya but are elements of the bigger global economy or global politics? Having said that, I now spend 2 minutes to go back to your question, which is, are there transformative agendas in the Azimio Manifesto? I agree with you that the choice of words is really from the vocabulary of the Social Democrats. And therefore, the choice of word becomes very interesting because it's from a vocabulary. However, I think there is something that overall, I think Azimio is trying to deal with, in my opinion. I think the Azimio Manifesto, overally, in my opinion, seems to come from the framing of saying the market has failed us. What do we do? And so the manifesto is an attempt to move Kenya into a social democratic state. We in civil society, we have called this a human rights state. And there are 2 models of human rights state. One model of human rights state is one where the pillars are emphasized of accountability, transparency, equity. As you see in Article 10. Another framing of human rights state is where we take and control market fundamentalism. The idea that is evident in the manifesto is an attempt to control market fundamentalism. They want to limit the trust that we have in the market to distribute the results of economic progress or to distribute public good. And you see that through what they're calling social transformation agendas, be it the Inua Jamii, be it Babacare, and be it the frameworks of nation building. You also see it in their economic stimulus recovery, which is of course a continuation of what we see in Kibaki. We also see it in their energy sector. We also see it in the idea of youth and sports. However, I think they don't move deep enough to the level that we'll call transformative. Why? It does not appreciate the capability of the people. And that's a big limitation. The manifesto is based on people as people who have needs, but it's not based on the capability that the people have. And that's a big problem, be it livestock, where they say, we will, for example, provide insurance. Of course, that is to control market fundamentalism. But they don't see that the problem is value chain and supplies, so that then you deal with the value chain question. Look at another example. The example of agriculture. Not a bad idea, but they don't deal with the problem of food sovereignty. So the idea we can see, the imagery, is the imagery of building a socially democratic state, and that is a good idea. However, if you don't build that on people's capability, then what? Thank you.
Right. I think, Steve, you'll need to let me control my mic. Otherwise, I will really struggle. Steve is our IT person. Thank you, Thank you, Dr. Steve Ouma. And you've started us off on an excellent note. Thank you for grounding our discussion with that philosophical and background, so that we can understand better, cut through what the words are telling us, the kind of economic, the kind of model that is underpinning the manifesto. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for your comments, which you're schooling us and also challenging us. And thank you for that. I'd like to proceed to introduce our next panelist. And we are very honored to have Dr. Miriam Omollo. Miriam Omollo is the Executive Director of the African Policy Institute. And she's also she has over 15 years of experience in international trade development and poverty issues. She worked at the Institute for Economic Affairs and Africa Economic Research Consortium, both in Kenya. She also consults for the World Bank on poverty and inequality and urban development in Kenya. She holds a doctorate in economics from the University of South Africa, where she examined the impact of trade policy reforms on household welfare in Kenya using a computable general equilibrium model. We will get to understand better what that means. Her main area of focus, her main areas of research interest are trade and development, poverty and welfare, and the emerging extractive sector. So, Dr. Miriam Omollo, welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar. Please introduce yourself. And because we've allowed Dr. Ouma to give us a grounding in terms of the background, a kind of a wider view of the manifesto, please feel free to do so. And then give us an opening statement on what you perceive to be the most transformative aspect of the manifesto, if any, and give us a justification of the same. Dr. Omollo, welcome. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Wanjiru, and I'm happy to be here. The line broke a bit, and I hope you just asked the question about if the manifesto is transformative, and if yes, why? If no, why? All right. Given my background, I do a lot of analytical research, and poverty, welfare is one of them. I also look at issues of public finance. And right now, I know you have an older profile. It's over now 18 years of experience in research and in economic issues. So I had time to go through the manifesto. And I would like to thank Dr. Steve for giving that background and moving from the Kibaki regime and to where we are right now. So I'm looking at it, and I was looking at going by sectors, what this manifesto is talking about. And I was asking myself, first of all, what is currently ailing our economy? What are the key issues? Are these going to be addressed in a way that will bring improvement? So first, I would like to commend the people who did the manifesto. In terms of graphics, it's been well done. In terms of content, it has a lot of content. And then now we need to look at various issues and ask ourselves, is this transformative? So I would like to bring the element of productive capacities. Is this manifesto going to improve productive capacities? Because from high productive capacity, there'll be a lot of production. The economy is going to grow. There'll be enough taxes to bring in the social transformation. So I looked at various sectors. And the first question I asked myself, are the youth going to be catered for? Yeah, so my first question is about the youth. Are the youth being addressed? There are issues being addressed because there is high level of unemployment. You look at the Juakali sector, and one of the things they're trying to really bring in the issue of recognition of qualifications in the Juakali sector. But is that the problem? The challenge in the Juakali sector is this high level of informality. So if we are to make that sector productive, how do we move them from informality to formality in such a way that they are not scared of the taxations? Because one of the reasons they remain informal is because of high taxation. Are we going to have tax incentives that will increase formality in the Juakali sector so that they can provide, they can be able to access finance to, first of all, start up their businesses and then not remain as startups, but grow from small enterprises or micro enterprises to small, medium enterprises? When I look at the manifesto, the sector is being addressed, and I'm expecting to see more information beyond this document, and hopefully in the future, how will this be done? Perhaps this is not the right place where it is being done, but the question is, how will this be done? Because the issue of informality needs to be adequately addressed or presented in that document as well. The second thing I looked at, which I asked myself, is a big problem. We have gender-related issues, gender biases. We've just come from a COVID season. So within this COVID season, we saw a very increase in violence, gender-based violence, and women tend to be the majority casualties. Of course, right now, times are changing, and you also see a lot of men who are casualties of gender-based violence. And the reason why the rate for men is also low, it could be a case of underreporting, but they're there. So I'm asking myself, are gender issues being addressed? One thing I've seen in this
Dr. Miriam,
Yes.
I'm going to kindly come, you're beginning to canvass issues in the manifesto.
Yes.
And so you're preempting our conversation somewhat. And so I will just ask that maybe as you wind up your opening, you can answer the question of, have you seen those transformative aspects? In fact, let me just reread the question. What is the most transformative aspect of the manifesto? And a brief justification before canvassing the issues in full, because as we get into the conversation, we'll canvass them. So did you want to add something briefly?
And that is why my answer is it is nuanced. It cannot be black or white. And that is why I'm picking them one by one. They are nuanced. You cannot get it black or white in the manifesto. So the issue of gender is there. Is it cross-cutting? It is a standalone, but to make it cross-cutting, to make it transformative, it has to be cross-cutting within each of the sectors, not a standalone, because issues of gender are intersectional. So in that sense, the transformativeness is nuanced. It is not black or white, yes or no. That is the second thing. The other area, I'm seeing elements of transformation, but still need a lot of detail. Sorry, have a slight blackout. I hope you can hear me. That still needs concern to be dealt with is the sports sector, because sports is with the youth. That is where you can have transformation. It has been addressed mildly, it can be improved, but that is an area where there is transformation. The extractive sector, oil and gas, and mining. Mining has been addressed. When we look at oil and gas, because these are areas that still require a lot of action, I expect to see more of it there. Water has been a key issue in Azimio and has been addressed as one of the issues. I think that's under it's one of the issues, the issue of water. How do we make it transformative? It is to the extent that we are going to manage our water systems during drought and during floods. So the element of transformation needs to be really looked at if it's to be actually transformative to bring change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omolo. I think you've handled it from a different perspective, but possibly also mirroring what Dr. Ouma said, where there are some elements of transformation, but doesn't move deep enough. You're telling us that transformation is nuanced. And so maybe as we interrogate further, we'll be able to unpack some of those nuances and see whether the different sections are working together to bring out the transformation, or whether indeed it is merely a catchword that doesn't gel very well together. So we are still in our introduction, and welcome to those who continue to join us. I had indicated earlier that we apologize. There was a slight miscommunication around the time, where we had 2 times posted, 7 o'clock and 7:30. We are still in the introduction. We haven't, even though we are getting very juicy introductions, very good grounding for our conversation, we haven't yet started into the discussion proper. So I believe we'll be able to move together. We've had the introduction from Dr. Steve Ouma, from Dr. Miriam Omolo, and it's now my pleasure to introduce Reginald Kadzutsu, who is an economic analyst and investment professional. Reginald Kadzutsu is an economist. He is currently the turnaround manager for Amana Capital and an associate lecturer and PhD candidate at Oxford Brookes University. Many of you will have heard Reginald Kazutsu, who he speaks on economic matters on numerous media platforms, and provides very critical insights into the government's handling of economic matters. Reginald, it's a pleasure to have you with us. An honor to have you join us. Thank you for making the time. Kindly give your opening statement, and I know there's a question to guide that statement, but we are giving quite a lot of latitude just because of the breadth, the depth of the area. The area is wide and the issues are very cross-cutting. So the opening statement, our request is that you share with us the most transformative aspect of the manifesto and provide a brief justification of the same. So Reginald, please take the mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've read through the Azimio Manifesto, the 47 pages of the Azimio Manifesto. And one thing that I would like to put in front is that when you are looking at a manifesto is generally gives you an overview of the idea of what the government wants to do. So you will not find depth in a manifesto. If you're looking for depth in a manifesto, you will not find it in a manifesto. It's a manifesto is more of a statement of intent. You will not find the policy in the manifesto, neither are you going to find really numbers in the manifesto. The only hope is that the manifesto is based on data, looking at what has happened previously in the country and what is happening in the economy and what needs to be done. So when I looked at this manifesto, and what I would say one thing which is transformative, and again, looking at it holistically, you cannot, when it comes to economics, you cannot pick one sector and dissect it by itself. You want to see how they interact. So for me, the Azimio Manifesto, which is built around manufacturing as the key core, number one, that is transformative in itself, that we have the pivotal area where we want to transform the economy of the country. And having manufacturing at the center becomes important. But then if you have the manifesto and you read with the other sections of the manifesto, you realize it's not manufacturing in a vacuum. The Jubilee government had an issue of having unnecessary setting up a whole manufacturing plant. You know, they had manufacturing which was top of head and not cognizant of the structure or the macroeconomic fabric of the Kenyan economy. So having manufacturing at the center, and then having supporting sectors to that manufacturing sector, for example, agriculture, where the manufacturing sector is supposed to generate tools, machinery, and mechanizers to help the agricultural sector. So, for example, tractor parts, for example, irrigation equipment, for example, irrigation pumps. Why do we import irrigation pumps? Why can't we make irrigation pumps? So if you are building it in that element, because truth of the matter, agricultural sector is still the main sector of the economy, directly and indirectly contributes close to 50% of our current GDP. 70% of all employed people in the country are employed in the agricultural sector, and 70% of all people live in the rural areas where their mainstay of activity is actually the agricultural sector. So the element that they have decided to start from there and to build a base from there makes it very critical. So you have a manufacturing sector that feeds into the agricultural sector. Then the agricultural sector itself feeds into the manufacturing sector through value addition. And if you read the manifesto, they've given an example of 3 value chains: the cotton value chain for textile, the leather value chain, and the blue economy value chain, which shows that now from the agricultural sector, you have products that can be value added, which is now manufacturing in itself. So manufacturing is feeding into agriculture, agriculture is feeding into manufacturing, and all this is being done. You are creating jobs. Okay, well, I hope they will do it in a way that it consumes labor, because Kenya is a labor-intensive economy and a capital deficit economy. And the problem of the Jubilee government, they tried to push a capital-intensive agenda, and that's why people say we are seeing economic growth, but we're not feeling it on the ground. It's because it's high capital-intensive, which has led us into debt, but has not improved the lives of people. So that element of the manufacturing and agriculture are feeding into each other. And then they put on top of that economic diplomacy. Because at the end of the day, without markets, any manifesto economic blueprint that will come that does not create markets is useless. Because Kenya is a very small economy, and without thinking of outside the border of, yes, we have a manufacturing sector, but where are we going to sell these things? Where are we going to sell the byproducts of our agricultural sector, so that we are not wasting anything? So for example, I take the bee industry. You have honey, which is the final product, but before you get to the honey, you have you have the wax that comes with it. You have many other byproducts, which some of them are even medicinal, but they need a market for you to be able to do that. So I think if one looks at that Azimio Manifesto holistically and how the elements interconnect to the main cog, which is manufacturing, you will actually then see that there is hope. Because the whole purpose of an economy is to arrange your factors of production, your land, labor, capital, to be productive, to increase the incomes of the factors of production, two, and to be able to withstand shocks to those factors of production. That's economics. So whether someone comes and says trickle down, bottom up, at the end of the day, they are all doing the same thing. How do we arrange these three things to make sure that their productivity goes up, and so forth, therefore income actually goes up? So if I look at the Azimio Manifesto with manufacturing and not capital intensive manufacturing that is connected to the mainstay of the economy, which is the agricultural sector, I see that if executed well, when you come to the policy, it depends now when they come into power, if they come into power, what policies they will put in place to implement this. If implemented, this is what will actually be transformative, because we will see factor incomes going up, factor productivity going up, and that is what takes people out of poverty.
Thank you very much, Reginald. Reginald, I think your answer is much more straightforward. You are saying that you've seen the linkages and those linkages between this critical sector, manufacturing, and the economic diplomacy, if executed and if focusing on labor-intensive methods, is transformative in itself. And of course, that if is a big one, because we know implementation is a big challenge for us, and there is a section that speaks to governance. So thank you very much for that opening statement. And already taking us, opening statements are already taking us into the thrust of the document. Our last panelist, our final panelist, who I hope has joined us because he had indicated he had an engagement at the university, is Professor Collins Odotte. Professor Odotte is a lawyer, and he's an advocate of the High Court, has a PhD in law from the University of Nairobi. He's associate professor at the law at the University of Nairobi, where he also serves as associate dean of the Faculty of Law and director of the Center for Advanced Studies in Environmental Law and Policy. His areas of specialization are in elections, governance, land and environment, areas where he has researched, published, and consulted widely. It's an honor to have him with us. I hope he has joined us. Professor Odotte Collins, are you on the call?
And I've been on the call for the last 35 minutes, Shiro.
Oh, wonderful. Karibu, please give us your opening statement, which has turned out to be quite, a lot more robust than the initial conceived, but please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Shiro, and thank you, colleagues. It's good to be last because I was asking Rosalia on the background, where was this memo about the opening statements? And she just told me, oh, we shared it earlier. In my hurry, I never saw it. But I think I want to start the conversations by asking myself a question, because you've asked us, what is the most transformative aspect of the manifesto? And I started by asking myself, I thought when we adopted the 2010 Constitution, we said that the 2010 Constitution was transformative. Therefore, if it has delivered on its promise, then 12 years after the 2010 Constitution, we should not be transforming. We should now be upscaling the transformation. But I think the reason why you asked that question has something to do with what Steve said in his context, in his opening remarks, that the context in which we are in is that the reality is that we actually require a transformation. And if you look at events in the last few days, I think yesterday on TV, there was a conversation about the impact of the current economic crisis on the Kadogo economy, the economy for the ordinary citizen, with a price of maize, 2 kgs of maize going at around 150, 160, and a packet of unga going for 200. That kind of environment requires actually transformation. Secondly, if you look at today's Business Daily, the bottom of the Business Daily on the front page says that the Nairobi Stock Exchange is the third worst performing stock exchange in Africa this year, with many people flying and going back, having capital flight and going back to their countries to invest. People are even investing in the US, yet we were told that Africa is the new frontier of investment. It therefore tells you we have an economic problem requiring economic transformation. No wonder a lot of my colleagues, Dr. Omolo and the rest, have spoken about the economic issues in the manifesto. In my view, I don't think that is the most transformative aspect of that manifesto. But before going to what I think the most transformative aspect of the manifesto is, allow me to make 2 more things, then I will talk about what I think is the most transformative aspect of the manifesto. I agree with you, moderator, that the language in this document is simple and clear. I also agree with Kadzutsu that it is not in the manifesto that you find the details, that you find the statistics. You hope that it is based on robust statistics. But I have some slight problem with the manifesto. I think the commitments are too many, and sometimes there's some repetition. No wonder Dr. Miriam was struggling to pick out what is the most transformative, because there are too many commitments that are being made. And I think the danger with too many commitments is that you may enter into the arena of over-promising and under-delivering. I think it's important to start reflecting on what are then the key priorities, how do you sequence them? In my view, because of the context, the thing that I find the most transformative in this manifesto is the recognition that addressing the economic challenges that we face is not about just fixing the economy. It's about recognizing that the economic problems are linked to social issues. They are linked to our governance challenges. So for me, the most transformative aspect of this constitution is the recognition that we must address the governance challenges that this country faces. We must address corruption head on, because a lot of the economic problems that the country faces have also been exacerbated by our poor governance. A friend of mine was telling me that if you look at corruption in a lot of government institutions, the situation is worse than it was before 2010, before we adopted the 2010 Constitution, because people have reached a stage of saying, as the retired Chief Justice William Mutunga used to say, utadu. And I think unless we bring a stop to that, a lot of the economic promises will come to naught. My last issue, which I think for me is transformative, is unlike Steve, who says that there is no focus and there's little focus on the citizenry. I really like the fact that once you get out of the 10 promises and you start the details, the first chapter of the Azimio Manifesto talks about the people. I like the fact that they recognize the centrality of the people in transforming our society. The details we can get to it, but those for me are what I think are the most transformative aspect. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you very much, Professor Odotte. That is well appreciated. And thank you for those excellent opening statements. Let us get straight into our conversation. And in fact, Collins, you have brought us to the point. I'll briefly mention that the Azimio Manifesto, and for those, I'm sure most have had a chance to look at it, but for those who haven't, their vision and commitments are articulated around three values, and then there's a 12-point agenda. The values and this 12-point agenda seeks to provide and create an economic revolution, social transformation, and good governance. And this will be rooted in Utu, the recognition of the inherent value, dignity, and sanctity of the life of each and every Kenyan, empowerment in the celebration of hard work of Kenyans and creating an environment in which their efforts will reap benefits, and inclusiveness for Kenyans across the Great Republic. And then, like I said, there are 12 commitment areas. We won't get into those. Today's discussion will be based on the main pillars or the chapters that are presented in the manifesto. And the first of those pillars or chapters is investing in the people of Kenya, which was the point that, the last point that Professor Odotte touched on. And my question, as I look at this particular chapter or pillar, who can argue with the intention to invest in the people? And I ask myself the question and want to put this to the panelists. Why do you think, what do you think is the purpose of this very short chapter? And does it resonate with the other chapters or pillars in the manifesto? And I'd like to throw this question to Dr. Steve Ouma. And the question is, what do you think, why did the drafters of this manifesto put this as the first pillar? And does it resonate with the others? Dr. Ouma, please.
Thank you very much, Shiro. And I'm glad you've invited me to that discussion. I would like to start by making a clarification to Professor Odotte. I think he didn't get my point at all. I did not say that this manifesto is not focused on the people. This is a very important distinction, which I think is intellectually quite important to engage with. I said this manifesto looks at the people as those in need. It does not look at people as those with capability, with a history of success that ought to be tapped. That's a very important framing, because if you look at a country like South Sudan, the problem in South Sudan is that the agencies who have put in a lot of money there, put money there with a framing of development as an intervention in a situation of perpetual crisis that requires humanitarian intervention. Back to your question, Shiko, the reason why I think the people is the first chapter here is very obvious, and it points to what Professor Odotte mentioned. Our Constitution, in its Article 1, has grounded the people as the center of the covenant between the governed, as the governed, to the governor. So anybody who wants to govern this country and paying attention to the Constitution will start from the people. We call it Wanjiru, Anyango, Atieno, Kerubo, and so on. So that is the reason. However, I still want to insist that I have a problem in the framing of this article because it does not show us how is this manifesto going to build on the resilience, on the innovativeness, on the adaptability of the people. So you have a need-based approach. So for example, look at paragraph 3. Our commitment is to foster an environment where citizens develop a sense of civic responsibility, mutual respect, shared values, and so on. And then the third one, the last one, the fourth one. Investing in the people requires a major economic revolution built around economic inclusivity, equity, employment. Where is, for example, people's innovation? So, and that's a very important language in my opinion, that a capability approach is also a governance approach, where you're saying the people are leading us. That's why if you go to Article 159, for example, when it says judicial authority is derived from the people. So we need the people framing to be derivative, to know that the people are not empty shells, are not just in perpetual need, in requirement to be for a nanny kind of an economy or a governance system. But the people have a history of resilience, a history of innovation, sometimes a history of dissent, which provides the ingredients with which to build the future. So appreciating that is a governance issue. Appreciating that is a model of development that is not too much aligned to a charity-based, a need-based framework, which, in my opinion, does not take the power of the people seriously. Nevertheless, in conclusion, I think it's very, very important that any economic policy blueprint in this country have to start with recognizing the centrality of the people, because that is what the Constitution has put as the infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will ask Professor Dr. Collins, please come in on the same question, and maybe you could also respond to Steve's comments on this particular chapter. What do you think was in the mind of the framers of the manifesto when they put this chapter as the first? And do you agree that it's taking maybe a bit of a, am I getting a sense, Steve, that there's a bit of a dependency approach to this, not adequately tapping or appreciating the power of the people? You know, so maybe Professor Odotte could respond to your remarks. I don't know if I phrased your concern correctly. Collins?
I could give a comment to the last interpretation.
Please do.
Good, Professor. Professor, look at the problem of South Africa. South Africa is a people-centered democracy. But their model, in my opinion, is one where the social services, for example, that is offered, social grants, for example, is one that builds what others have called a nanny economy, where the idea of human rights is about going with the ball and you know, having the government feed the ball. So yes, back to your question, Shiro, I think there is a little bit of a problem of creating a nanny economy. But now that you've called me, I would like Mr. Prof to talk about this thing of saying that they want us to have a sense of civic responsibility. How can we be the ones who have given the power, and then our civic responsibility is almost questioned, because this is sort of an antithesis to self-determination. Thank you.
I think that's very powerful, and maybe Professor Odotte, you could pick up on that, respond to what Dr. Ouma has given us and help us clarify this, because I mean, it goes on further to say that there's been an overemphasis on rights, and there is a need to rebalance on responsibility. implying that rights and economic development don't always go together. So looking at this pillar and linking it to the subsequent pillar, there's a subsequent pillar where this is qualified further. So Professor,
I'm not sure I'm going to respond because responding means that, let me actually just make the point I want to make. And I want to make 3 points. The first is today in the morning, I was having a conversation on the media with 2 colleagues of mine. And we made the point that what Steve is calling the nanny economy is, I think, trying to copy the welfare state of the West, which is a nice thing in terms of social transformation. But there are 2 ways in which you do welfare and you do subsidies. One is as an emergency measure to try and deal with a particular situation, e.g. during a pandemic. The second is if you are in a place like Norway, where the basics have been dealt with, then you are now dealing with certain vulnerable members of society. But when the majority of your people are vulnerable, then a welfare approach to solving problems is wrong. And I think to the extent that there are conversations within the document that seeks to take us towards welfareism, I think it misses the point. That's the point I think Steve is making, and I agree, Steve. The second point, which is where we have a slight nuance, is number one, I think if we agree that it is important to recognize the people at the center, I think they do a good job in making the people at the start. And I think for me, the rationale for doing so is if you realize the basis on which Azimio was formed, and the name says Azimio, about unity, about people. So it would have made no sense for them to start a conversation that focuses on what everybody admits is the election issue for 2022. And the election issue for 2022, some people would say, the economy is stupid. If they focus just on the economy and forgot that at the heart of this is about the people, they would miss the point. But I think the issue that is all of us must accept, and Steve, on this, you're right, the chapter on the people, which is chapter 1, again, if you look at the chapter on governance also, which is at the last, you find that they are shy on the details in terms of what the people require. And what it means to focus on the people. For example, this meeting today is convened, Shiro, by civil society. I struggled to find the recognition of civil society and their place in governance in this document. And I think that, for me, is a mistake that needs to be addressed. Going back to the conversation about rights and responsibilities. And I think, Shiro, you're the one who talks about the fact that people seem to think that you cannot develop and at the same time enjoy rights. It takes me back to, I think, conversation just before the Chinese came. There was a whole conversation about the development state. And people used to give the example of South Africa. What is it that is important? Is it that you need people to develop and have food on the table, or do you want them to enjoy rights? And I think it is fundamental that you can chew gum and walk the stairs at the same time. So this fallacy of saying it is either the protection of rights or the enjoyment of economic freedoms does not make sense. That's why 50%, I am happy that there's a recognition of the place of citizens in governance. And if you look at their first promise on that chapter, the people, they say, we recognize the centrality of the people. That, for me, I think is fundamental. But the part where I think is a mistake is one, to except in the chapter on governance where they talk about people's participation, I think the agency of the people, and that's the point Steve is making, is not as stressed as it should be. It is made worse by the fact that they seem to borrow language that I saw in the initial draft of the BBI document, language that says, and I think it's one of my students who was a presidential candidate in 2017 and also tried to vie this time but was knocked out as Solomon Gishira, who said, you can't be overemphasizing responsibilities at the altar of rights, especially in a content where there's been concerns about the lack of respect for the rule of law by the Jubilee government, where there's been concerns about people's rights not being fully respected. I think a statement that seems to suggest that we want to move away from just protection of rights and then to move to responsibilities might send the wrong message. Having said so, I think the reality, colleagues, is that in a democracy, we need to balance both rights and responsibilities. But I think to make the point that it is about responsibilities is to run away from rights, which in my view, I think is wrong. Thanks, Shiro. I hope I've tried to respond to Steve.
Thank you very much for that. And I would like to give a minute or two to Miriam to come into the conversation, add your voice to this discussion on this chapter or this pillar. Having heard what has been said, what is your thought about this chapter?
Thanks, Shiro. This is my thinking. When they started, I'm trying to put myself in the person who brought this chapter first, investing in the people. Let us look at the background where we are coming from. And who are the people? The people are all Kenyans. We've had a very bad background. At some point, we had the debate of hustlers versus dynasties, and the element that it's the dynasties that gain. Then we talk about Wanjiru, who is very detached and feels what is happening in government they're not part of it. So when you say investing in the people, you're bringing people at the center and you want to make them have a sense of belonging, that what we are going to do is for you to benefit, to gain, and to develop. So while they're trying to bring in different elements, the economic elements in it, the governance issues in it, my thinking is that to bring the element of ownership and togetherness, that we are in this together and we are out to serve you. That is how I interpret investing in the people being put as the first chapter, to let people know we are together in this. So let us start working together, and this is what we plan to do. Otherwise, if that is not put there, it will not be different from the feeling that Kenyans have had for the last 10, 20 years, that government are serving themselves and not the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omolo. Reginald, kindly add your voice on this one. What is your take on this particular chapter?
Thanks, Shiro. I think looking at the document, and if you look at any professionally written document, I think the professors and the doctors can attest here. I take this investing in the people as the abstract of everything else that is going to come after that. They're setting the tone that everything you are going to see or read in this document, when we talk about everything else, it's because of the people. So it's an abstract. It's kind of like a summary or the title of the document. You can actually pick this and use it as the theme of the document, investing in the people. And from an economics perspective, when you read and you start with this, then you read and you say, okay, so this is what you want to achieve. You want to invest in the people. How are you going to invest in the people? Then now they go to the other parts, manufacturing, agriculture, so governance, and all and stuff. So again, as I said in the beginning, it has to be read holistically. If you take documents and you try to look at them in silos, you will come up with the wrong conclusion unless you read the whole document holistically. Dr. Steve has mentioned the element of that it's more of a nanny kind of thing. They viewed people as in need. That's one way of viewing it, but viewing it from an economist perspective is, if they want local manufacturing, that means that's recognition that we have the skills and the capacities to do local manufacturing. If they look at value addition in the agricultural sector, then that's recognition and of the creativity and the innovation that is in that sector. So it's a very thin line between saying that this is looking at it as people who are just in need and not people that have skills. But the whole Azimio manifesto is more of internal looking. How do we generate capacities internally for our people to do the work? Because we're able to do them. We're able to generate these textiles. We are able to manufacture copper, steel, and all these other things. We have the resources. So I believe that is the recognition of the capacity and the capability of the citizens of the country. So for me, it's the abstract of what Azimio are trying to do, to be read together now with the rest of the information that comes in the document.
Thank you very much, Reginald. And I can see you're trying to reconcile Steve's discomfort with this nanny approach that he feels the manifesto is taking, versus, kind of this more maybe what guided developments approach. I don't know if that's one and the same thing. Maybe we'll get deeper into that, because the second chapter is on is entitled "The Gateway and Manufacturing Hub for Eastern and Central Africa," and this is you could say that the economy is the foundation of the manifesto, and this particular chapter, under this chapter, the manifesto seeks, or the party seeks, to tap opportunities in the Africa Free Trade Area, and I'm summarizing significantly, but they seek to tap regional opportunities under the AFTA and the East African Community. And their commitment is to pursue a revolutionary economic framework to deliver more jobs for the youth, create inclusive wealth, reduce over-reliance on imported products, ensure shared prosperity and poverty reduction, protect the environment, use natural resources sustainably, and mitigate the effects of climate change. And their key sectors of focus are agriculture, livestock, the blue economy, and ICT. So they start off with a clear focus. And I think at the outset, Reginald had given us a rationale for the agriculture sector in terms of the numbers and its contribution to the GDP and the transformative potential that it has. So I know we've touched on this, but I would like us to revisit this again. What are the factors that presently ail the manufacturing sector in Kenya? And has this chapter adequately dealt with them? And are these commitments compatible with the commitment to maintain and continue the Jubilee infrastructure developments? Are they also compatible with the other commitments that the document has made? So I know I'm asking a battery of questions, but I hope that Reginald, because I'll be opening for you first, then we can hear from Miriam. Maybe you can help us really look at that. What are the issues that are ailing manufacturing? Because Kenya has had numerous development plans, and we've, looking at the growth trajectory of other countries, recognize the need to add value to our raw products, but we never seem to get it right. What are those barriers or factors, and has the manifesto dealt with them beyond the nice language that we are hearing? Thank you. Over to you, Reginald.
Thank you. The manufacturing sector in Kenya, number one, what made it not succeed, actually more of collapse during the Jubilee reign. Number one, you don't manufacture when you don't have a market for it. And that's one thing that I mentioned at the beginning. You cannot have a manufacturing sector that does not have a market. So that's number one thing that ailed. Number two, our cost of production in Kenya has been so high that it renders our manufacturing not competitive. So if we just use electricity, for example, if you look at our cost per kilowatt, it's one of the highest on the continent, actually. In the region, definitely the highest in terms of dollars per kilowatt. Our current manufacturing is purely agro-processing. Yeah, 90% of our current manufacturing is agro-processing. So if the agricultural sector dies, the way it has died recently because of getting less than 5% of the budget allocation in the last 10 years, and you have your whole manufacturing sector that revolves around the agricultural sector currently as is, you realize agricultural sector goes down, manufacturing sector will go down with it because they get all their inputs from the agricultural sector. And I don't know whether it was by design, but the Jubilee government killed the agricultural sector and the agricultural economy. And the only things that survived there are the things that were exported raw, so your coffee, your tea, your flowers, and stuff like that. So the manufacturing sector is now relegated to posho mills for whatever oil, and even that one for cooking oil. We are now importing most of the things to make cooking oil and all, and that's how the manufacturing sector died. Jubilee tried to grow the manufacturing sector by bringing foreign companies to set up manufacturing, particularly in areas of motor vehicles, like Volvo. I think there's another car plant that was brought, but that was more for assembly, not manufacturing. Was all the parts come in here and does not have the required impact and effect that it's supposed to have. The textile sector, which they tried to revive in the EPZ, imports 80 to 90% of all its imports. So they are now affected by the currency up and down. They are affected by competition from markets that do garments cheaper, your Bangladesh and your Asian giants. So manufacturing has not been looked at as the center of the economic engine, but it was a supplementary sector there. And the main sector, which was agriculture, died a natural death as we were building roads and railways. So when I go to the Azimio document and I read what they want to do on manufacturing, number one, key thing is that it is not capital intensive manufacturing they're looking at doing. Number two, it is not the government that is going to be setting up the one factory, one product. They want to create an environment that allows FDI to come into the country, FDI which collapsed during Jubilee government, to come into the country and set up those factories, combined now with economic diplomacy. So assuming the ambassador in the US does their job and we get a free trade with the US, then you have a bargaining tool where you can get an Indian or a Bangladeshi or a Sri Lankan garment manufacturer to come and set up a factory somewhere in Kisumu or wherever there is cotton. Yeah. So you start growing cotton, your cotton now is a ready buyer, EPZ plus this guy. You get someone who comes to do the ginnery and all. So the guy who's making the garments is not making the garments for the Kenyan market, but you're saying Kenya has free access to the US market. Bangladesh, you have a quota of what you need to produce to supply to the US market. You cannot go past that quota. So your excess skills and ability, you come set up a factory in Kenya, you employ Kenyan people, you are buying Kenyan raw materials, and you see that manufacturing starts. So if the Azimio government makes a mistake of trying to build the factories, then that's a completely wrong direction to go. But if they then create policy that attracts people with the skill set or the private sector to be able to build those factories, then you will find a good way of going it. So if you look at the manufacturing they're mentioning, is manufacturing of tools for the agricultural sector, manufacturing for tools for the construction sector. So it's manufacturing that is linked to an existing sector in the economy first, and any excess supply then can go to the region, because the Kenyan economy is so small. If you do not have market outside, So again, that's why I said it has to be looked at holistically. And that's why they've mentioned later in a document of economic diplomacy. How do we get markets for our products? How do we get preferential treatment for our products to enter these markets? That the only thing I'm not seeing on the manufacturing sector or is the financial sector, how it is combining with all these things. But the problem that we have, especially when we start going towards welfare, where we want to give 6,000 and all that, it's a failure of the financial system and financial sector, because households are supposed to be able to insure against shocks or be able to borrow to smooth consumption, which is what the 6,000 is trying to come and do, smooth consumption during the periods of shocks. So I would have expected a big section on how do we make the financial sector relevant to the structure of an economy where 70% of the people live in the rural areas, kind of thing. So if we look at the manufacturing sector in the Azimio Manifesto, in that angle or with that lens, you realize then it makes sense. As long as then the government is not the one implementing it, but they are setting up the environment for private sector to come and implement. If implemented as the way I've perceived it, I might be misinterpreting what they thought, but from the way I've read, this would be the best way of putting it at the center. Then you can now start seeing one, productivity going up, because that is very key. And Dr. Miriam has mentioned it, productivity going up. Productivity of capital, productivity of labor, productivity of natural resources, which is the land. Yeah, if these three productivities go up along with the income to the factors of production, then trust me, you start seeing people being uplifted slowly but surely from poverty.
Thank you very much, Reginald. And I'd like Dr. Miriam. Dr. Omolo, please, could you also respond to that question? Give us your take on the this pillar. And I know you also have a special interest in the MSME sector. So maybe you could tell us, do you feel that this particular chapter is responding to the challenges that ail the manufacturing sector? And without repeating, what Reginald has said, you could add on. Mm-hmm. And the manifesto also gives prominence to the MSME sector. And should we be excited? Are you seeing some good linkages? Dr. Omolo?
Thank you very much, Shiro. I'll add on to what Reginald has said, because even as he was talking, I could see my points were just going away one by one, which is okay. First of all, just to give something else that is really ailing manufacturing is imports. Remember from the beginning, we were protecting our industries so that they can grow, so that they can be developed. We cannot say that in the sugar sector. We've been importing. If you go to during this COVID season and you talk to manufacturing, even things like matchboxes that can be produced locally were being imported. So there is too much imports of things that can actually be produced locally. And that one is more of a political issue than even an economic issue, because it is the bigwigs who are doing these imports. So one thing that the manifesto has, can I say, not clearly addressed, but how are we going to deal with, I'll call them unnecessary imports that are actually destroying the manufacturing sector. Something else that I've seen from the work experience I've done and looking at a lot of the negotiations that have been going on, and I'll give you examples, the trade negotiations. What can be our undoing and still remains our undoing is what we negotiate for our country. In the trade negotiation process, if you look at the Kenya-US FTA, it is not clear where it has reached at this point with the regime change, but that was an area where we are going to really get raw deals, because we are trying to look for markets. But you find that those markets, in as much as they are there, we are not negotiating what is good for us. Because one, the US economy is over more than 50 times bigger than the Kenyan economy. We cannot stand and negotiate a reciprocal agreement where we are trading at the same level with such countries. We are going to lose. We need to develop our manufacturing sector in a way that makes them competitive and not for cash cows for a few people. And we can see that in the sugar sector. So that is something that is still ailing us. And while they've talked about the deals and what can be negotiated, these are things that need to be looked into details. And the discussions have shown that the manifesto is the intent. But now when you are looking at what is really ailing manufacturing, just to add, and then our infrastructure is also weak, and that is a major area which is raising cost of doing business. Poor infrastructure is another one. We are not able to produce and even sell because of the fragmented nature of these markets, particularly in manufacturing. I'll give a good example. There was this man who did some very good benches sometime, and he was, I think, told to make the vice president, the deputy president, try to promote him. And I asked myself, can we have maybe every day producing 5 containers of such those foldable, there were tables that can be exported, 5 containers that can be exported every day. We do not have that capacity. And it brings back the question that Shiro has asked about the micro, small, and medium enterprises. It is very good that the manifesto is talking about promoting micro, small, and medium enterprises. And it brings me back to what I said at the beginning. The high level of informality in that sector cannot allow that sector to compete. So it has to be formalized and incentives put in that they can be formalized without taxation and to be incubated. I've seen a lot of issues of incubation being raised, but what type of incubation is still not clear, because there is incubation for the business to grow, but also incubation in an environment that promotes, that allows them to thrive, and especially on taxation issues. So if we add all these other challenges, and particularly the trade negotiation issues, the sector really needs to be developed. It has already been mentioned in the manifesto, but now even in terms of level of details, we'll likely see that in a different setup. But the fact that they've been presented there is a good thing. We will need to see more to really get the exact direction. Already this is an intent, it's an intent in a good direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for that. And I'd like to ask Professor Odotte to add his voice to this. I think many issues have been raised about manufacturing as the core promise. Feel free, Professor Odotte, to add on to what Reginald and Miriam have said as we critique, to say, you know, is this chapter dealing with the issues that ail our manufacturing? And also there are some governance issues that have come out about heavy imports, about cash cows and people who have interests. And these interests have been then driving the incentive to import as opposed to allowing local businesses to grow. We also have these trade agreements that we've recently gotten into, despite a lot of civil society resistance, despite also kind of some spirited discussions in parliament, but somehow a couple of trade agreements, and maybe there are 2 or 3 that were concluded in the last 18 months that may not be favorable, as Dr. Omolo is telling us. What do we do about those kind of contractual obligations? So what would be the barriers to the realization of this. Maybe Professor Odotte, you could speak to the issues that have been raised and give us your thoughts on this pillar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shiro. I think I like the fact that they spent almost a page and a half giving us diagrams of sectors where we can have value addition. But I think a lot of the times that you hear conversations about international trade, I think it's the executive director of ODM, when he used to work for civil society at Econ South Africa, Odorong, who used to make the point that the problem with Africa is that we produce what we don't consume and consume what we don't produce. And I think manufacturing is the perfect example of producing what we don't consume. We produce things and then we export them to the market. They go and add value and import them back to us at a cost. And I think by focusing a lot on value addition and ensuring that we build our manufacturing base for primary products that we need, I think it's the right way to go. You cannot be saying that you are already a middle income country when the bulk of your products are imported. I think the last 9 years has seen an exponential rise in importing basic things we should not be importing. Why are we importing matchboxes from strange places? So I think by focusing on value addition, focusing on levies, focusing on incentives for the manufacturing sector, I think it raises the right tone. But the things that I think could have been done more, and there are two things, actually three, that I think could have been done more in this section. The first one is the issues about costs of production. I think one of the things that the manufacturing sector has spoken to a lot is that the cost of production is high. Anybody who uses electricity in this country, even for your domestic needs, you know, you wake up today and tomorrow you have double your electricity bill. Imagine for the company that actually uses so much electricity. Doubling that is like essentially crippling it. And there's been a lot of reforms that President Kenyatta has been trying to drive in the manufacturing, in the energy sector. I've wished to see that added onto this chapter on manufacturing. I know they deal with energy later, but to speak about the cost of production in terms of lowering it and the ideas for lowering it would have been made more. And the second is what Dr. Miriam has spoken about. I think there is a line on MSM, micro and small medium enterprises. If you speak to KEPSA, and if you look at KEPSA's document that they're engaging the presidential candidate, I think the focus on MSMEs, and if you look at the documents on post-COVID recovery, there's a lot of focus on micro and small scale enterprises that I would have liked to see much more. I think the last is the governance issues. We know that manufacturing and economic investment is one side of the equation, but at the end, the other issues that actually bedevil the manufacturing sector is governance. Who are the people who import the things that make our domestic industries uncompetitive? Who are the sacred cows? How are they going to be dealt with? What are the strategies for dealing with this as part of unleashing the potential of the manufacturing sector? The last one is what you've asked, moderator. I think the conversations around trade agreements, how to ensure, when we passed the 2010 constitution, we said, you know, all trade deals must go through the people's representatives. But if the last conversations about the deal with the UK is anything to go by, we need to ask ourselves, how do we ensure that those people's representatives do not turn against the people? How do we stop them becoming purveyors of stopping transparency and stopping the promotion of local production? I would have liked to see much more language in terms of initiatives that we'll put in terms of promoting local production. I know that the conversations a few weeks ago about the debate between promoting local production of garments vis-a-vis the Mutumba industry became extremely political. But I think we need to ask ourselves, how do we ensure that we go back to a situation where buy Kenya, build Kenya is at the foundation of our manufacturing sector? And I think that's one thing that, for me, is critical for addressing the issue in the manufacturing sector. Thanks, Chiro.
Thank you so much, Collins. I'd like to invite Steve to also give us his reflections on this pillar. Steve?
Thank you very much, Shira, and thanks, panelists. I am a bit illiterate on this one, so I will take a very short look insights to it. First, let me start from where Professor Odotte left. The governance issue is a major gap that is missing there. And really, to just add to what Prof said, there's a problem in this country where that almost every politician now is also a businessman or businesswoman. And the business they often tend to do is not openly supportive to the growth of an embryonic manufacturing sector that we want. Equally, the culture of kickbacks, of cuts, and imposed co-directorship is a major barrier. You know, this is something that Manu Chandaria has talked about for years. And so I think it's important, and this is what Reginald had said, you have to read the manifesto holistically. So the governance issue ought to have an important interface with this segment. Second comment that I want to respond to before I give my own is what Dr. Miriam said. Dr. Miriam is suggesting that informality could be a problem. I take a completely almost opposite path to that. Informality, I don't think is a problem. I don't think it undermines competitiveness. I think the problem, in my opinion, is that vision that you need to be like Singapore. That's a problem, opinion. I think what we need to do, in fact, the diagram that they call here value chain, which I think is good as a diagram, but does not give us much, I think it needs to be complemented with how is the supply chain working now? So you show us what is the practice now, what is the current supply chain, and its value chain, and the kind of value chain that you are suggesting. But to show us just a flow, it's like drawing an organogram without telling us who is a director and who is an intern. And then we can't tell if it's only women who are interns and men are directors and so on. So I think balancing the value chain and supply chain is important, but I don't think that informality can be considered a problem. Look at India. India has deliberately decided that informality is there to stay. And what they have done is to create a kind of cottage industry that allows informality to compete almost at a good pace with the other forms of modernities. We must see modernities in its multiple forms. That is why Tata today is competing with the Suzu. We never imagined that will never happen, but it has happened because India has invested in the cottage industry. Now, two last points of my own is that first, as I declared in the beginning, I am a social democrat, and my reading of this manifesto is from the framing that what Azimio seems to have understood is that the market cannot be trusted in itself. And so they want to spur the market, but they want to intervene in distributing the outcomes of the market. And I agree with them. I agree with them because the market, we've seen neoliberalism has an inherent problem. Two problems. One, because we have never given it freedom. Politicians, merchants have interfered with the anticipated free flow. And so there's no free flow. There's always a cartel, a mafia, and this is global. And that mafia, therefore, makes it difficult for the neoliberal economic model to distribute product of human rights like equity, equality, and so on. And therefore, a state, and we see this now is a global movement, the state must intervene to insulate its people so as to insulate us from further inequalities and so on. But there's one good thing that I want to mention. Again, Reginald said that the best way of reading this manifesto is also to look at other proclamations that have been made by Azimio. And the presidential candidate of Azimio, I think 4 weeks ago, had a special TV announcement where he outlined their vision for Jua Kali, which I want to see. Is unfortunately it's not explicitly here because of course you can't get all the details. But what he said is that they want to promote Jua Kali in two ways, which I thought personally were very attractive and transformative. They say, look, one of the problems is that people in Jua Kali do significant work. However, there is no framework of measuring that labor and ensuring that that labor is compensated accordingly by people middle class like Professor Odotte and upcoming middle class like myself. So they are saying that rather than just emphasize on taxation, we will also create a framework where the Juakali artisan can get adequate compensation. I think that is very good. That is really how Singapore did it. That is very, very good. And I think it's a good thing to do. My final comment on this, Reginald mentioned the missing sector to be financed. And for me, the missing sector is the knowledge industry, I do a few knowledge industry work, which is called consultancies, although not as much as Shiro does or like as Dr. Miriam says she does and Professor Odotte. But when I do the little consultancies I do, it's so clear that the East African community, for example, has not prepared itself for knowledge industry to flourish. When I go to South Sudan, when I go to Tanzania, you are really bullied by the administrators there. And they want to make sure you're not making any income. Instead of creating a model of taxing me, and I would have no problem, in any case they do that, there's harassment and so on. And Kenya is a hub of knowledge. And we have an excellent knowledge industry here. And I would suppose that that is something that would have been developed alongside the catalogs in this sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, I will take that manifestation for more consultancies, more engagement in the knowledge industry for myself. And also noting that you had a disclaimer about not being very knowledgeable in this sector. I think your insights are very, very powerful and very useful. Thank you so much for that. I'd like to invite Professor Odotte to give his reflections on this. Thank you.
I just spoke before.
Oh, apologies. Apologies. I think I'm getting a bit overwhelmed. So thank you for pointing that out. I want us to move on because I can see we are running out of time. And there are two, there were two questions, maybe two additional areas to look at. One, we had dealt with the issue of citizen responsibilities, which is a small section that was added on to this particular chapter. There's also a very wide, kind of comprehensive treatment of the transformation, the foundations of the economic revolution. And then, of course, there's the social transformation and the governance. And I haven't been very good with time, so I'm now going to rush a little bit. And I will maybe just ask Reginald to give us a few, just a kind of a snapshot of what is your view of what they call the engine of the manifesto, the transformation of the macroeconomic, fiscal, and expenditure policies. You can keep it quite concise because I think we've touched on it in one way or the other. I'll then ask Miriam to add on very, very briefly. Then we can move to the social transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shir. The real engine of the transformation revolves on the manufacturing cog. Everything they've tried to do is trying to see how do we make the country manufacturing driven. How do we move away from exporting raw materials to become a manufacturing country? Because through manufacturing, then you're able to absorb the labor that we have. So truly, manufacturing or value addition, maybe if we use that terminology, maybe better, value addition in the agricultural sector, in the construction sector, and in the export sector is what they're trying to do, I guess, in the next 5, 10 years. Everything else is auxiliary supporting. Governance, as Professor Odotte and Dr. Steve have mentioned. Governance is key to make sure that people are not being bribed, people are not diverting taxes, people are not bribing to get license and product certification. So governance becomes key. But then you need a healthy workforce, and that's where universal health comes in. How do you make sure that the amount spent on healthcare is very low, so that disposable income increases, creates also domestic demand? How do you make sure that there is water for this manufacturing sector? How do you make sure that there is water for the labor and the workforce? Shiro, if you look at the statistics, the percentage of houses that have piped water in their house of households is only 11%. It has not changed during from Moi's time, Kibaki's time, Jubilee time. Water has completely been forgotten. So they've put auxiliary things which, one, are not economic, but are important to make sure that the growth is sustainable and the growth is reasonable. They've talked about energy, both the cost of production and all, reducing red tape, consolidating licensing, all these go to support the main cog, which is now value addition, or what they're calling manufacturing, supported by the main sector, which is agricultural sector. And in that agricultural sector, they've looked at 3 areas: textiles, livestock, and the blue economy. They also looked at food security as an offshoot of the agricultural sector to make sure that you have a healthy, productive labor force to drive this main cog of theirs called manufacturing.
Thank you very much. And because of time, I won't delve more into that, because we'll need to open the mics soon. I have already run over the interactive time, but I will ask Miriam to also input on that. Do you think the manifesto deals adequately with the issue of the prevailing fiscal gap? Is it implementable? Are these promises implementable? Do you think the social transformation pillar feeds in well onto the economic pillar? Thank you.
All right. First of all, looking at when I read this manifesto, the first thing I asked myself is, how will we finance it? I know the issues of finances are not presented in that document. These are intentions, but it is going to be very heavy in financing. And therefore, the only way is to ensure that there are high productive capacities. And the value chain approach that has been taken, there are selected value chains that they're looking at. We've already seen they're talking about fisheries, they're talking about clothing and textile, and they're talking about livestock. I think they're very good, and even the agriculture sector, the value chain is very important, because we are talking from the production point up to value addition. They are all interconnected. And one of the things you said, I do in the analysis, they call computable general equilibrium models, where you look at the effect of actions in one sector and how it replicates in other sectors of the economy. So the value chain approach is very important and very good in promoting productive capacities, hoping that that will help us raise good revenues to, one, reduce our deficits, and also balance it out with the debt issues. On the social part, the transformation part, can just speak more authoritatively about investing in education and health. And when it comes to education, one area I have not seen really addressed well, it's been addressed just education in general, but is very foundational for human capital development, is the concept of early childhood development. We are not bright because we just became bright the other day, or someone is not stupid because they just became stupid. The foundation is in the early childhood development part. That has not come out clearly. And now to add again, the element of, we are in a two-tier system of government. it looks like we are in a unified government, but it's a two-tier system, not very explicit in that document. In terms of financing, again, I'm still a bit jittery because it's going to be very heavy, and most of these activities might not receive financing. There has to be priority where to start. That is what I would like to add at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. And I'd like to ask Rosalia, could whoever is compiling the questions that are in the chat and streaming, please put them together so that once we've heard from Dr. Ouma and Professor Odotte, we can take those questions. And I'd like to ask Dr. Ouma, of course, social transformation is your, an area that you're actively researching, teaching, and advocating. And you've told us also your commitment to social democratic models of development. What is your view in terms of the social transformation pillar? How well aligned is that chapter to the objectives and aspirations of the manifesto? And I know we can't really do justice in this short time, but maybe you could give us some of your highlights on that, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, I'm very happy that the Azimio has specifically highlighted this chapter. And I must say that this country has embraced this framework now. When Justice Mutunga started using the word social transformation as an expression of designing our roadmap to social democratic state or human rights state, many people didn't embrace it. But you saw the Honorable Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya, Martha Koome, her blueprint is about social transformation. And I'm glad that the whole chapter is here. Let me start by saying that social transformation is not teleological. And if it is not teleological, that means that if you go back to what Prof Odotte was saying, that social transformation does not end by its promulgation or statement in the Constitution. It is the spirit, it is the framework that we use to expand our innovation, to expand our democracy, and so on. Now, I have 5 comments here. I like very much 3.1, the way this manifesto has stated citizen education is excellent, and it is really capability-based, as I was saying. It moves our students, our learners, from thinking that after class 1, the next thing is class 2, to helping our learners appreciate what problem am I expected to be able to solve by the time I finish class 1. That is excellent model. That is what countries like Singapore did, even countries that have promoted nationalism that we don't like South Africa, that's what they do. Countries like United States, America First, that's what they do. You have that philosophy. So I like very much the framing there. It's a framing that is very transformational. It's a framing that is capability-based. It's a framing that acknowledges that people are equipped. And equipped meaning that you are not starting from nowhere. You are appreciating that people have their own aspirations and so that's very good. Then I go to the next part, which is on youth economic inclusivity. I think here we also have very good ideas, but there are a few gaps that I think are important to mention. One, instead of saying create more employment, if you were to be consistent with your idea of education, you would say create opportunities for youth to innovate. Because I am a university teacher. I don't teach people the art of having balls to go and beg. So when even the higher education comes to evaluate our programs and they say the first thing is employability, I say, no, employability is okay, but also look at the ability to employ. So I think there's a disconnect there. I also think we must go back to the role of National Youth Service. National Youth Service must not become a domestication agency where people are taught to sing Tawala Kenya Tawala, or people are taught miniature military skills alone, but it must be where people are taught critical citizenship. critical nationalist skills. We can defend Kenya and critique Kenya, and that is lacking here. And that's an important component of social transformation. I also think that inclusivity means promoting autonomous youth associations. The youth must be encouraged to organize themselves into legitimate associations that can take position, because inclusivity is about position and condition. Position is a voice, and condition is the economic well-being. Allow me to also comment on marginalization. I think it is weak. It is an excuse to blame colonialism at this hour. Yes, the colonial blueprint and its whole notion of marginality is something we can't ignore. But right from sessional paper number 10, that was not a colonial paper, which perpetuated the very imprints. And after that, we have seen patronage flourish under Moi, under Kibaki, under Uhuru. So the problem of patronage, which is what was expressed by Moi through Sesambaya Meshambaya, is not a colonial question per se. And therefore, I think it is an excuse. The current problem of marginalization is patronage, which I think is a governance issue that ought to be responded to for that bit of a holistic change to be attained. Two last ones I want to mention is the issue of items like water, items like just like education. And I read with a lot of interest what they're talking about water here. And they're saying a large number of Kenyans cannot access water, and therefore they're saying Maji kwa kila boma, the local provision of water manufacturing. I was surprised that there was no idea of conserving water catchments, because the problem of water scarcity is not just a distributional problem, like Wangari Maathai used to teach us. It is another greed on land, eating up on public forests, eating up on water reserves. So unless you do that, then you cannot get water. So the question should be, what is causing water scarcity? And then secondly, what is causing distribution problem? So they've tried to deal with the distribution problem without scarcity. Final comment is on, which I like, is on this issue of social protection. I suggest that should be social security and protection. And in the era of COVID-19, we've seen, and I'm just finishing now, a strategic plan for the Federation of Trade Unions in East Africa. And I've argued that a trade union can no longer talk about collective bargaining agreement in a workplace without thinking about public policies on social security and protection. And equally here, the kind of social democratic state we want, the kind of mitigation of the fangs of market fundamentalism that we want, is not the one of nanny. We want a social security program, which we are ready to contribute to. We are saying there are a lot of people who have more money than the others. Let those who are less off be well off before those who are well off becomes better off. So what you do, you create a system where those who are better off now contribute a bit more so that everybody is well off. That's a robust social security program. And in South Africa, that has worked very well, including an insurance program for small-scale enterprises. And that is why, if you look at the post-COVID-19 recovery and economic reconstruction and recovery plan for South Africa, it is based on social security and protection. Any democratic state, as part of the social contract with its people, must be able to safeguard them in moments of anxieties or economic uncertainties or crisis, as we saw in COVID-19. So social security must go hand in hand with protection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ouma, for really giving us very strong grounding on social transformation and the need to ensure it's progressive. And as you were talking, I realized there's also many issues we won't discuss. And I urge that No, I'm just seeing some interesting chat there. Maybe the team can look to make sure we don't have any interference. But thank you very much for giving us those comments. We also have some tax measures, and as you're talking about the social protection, it came to mind. They're also talking about progressive taxation. So we are seeing gains here in terms of what you call the human rights society. That is kind of being proposed in this manifesto, and this feedback is very useful because we are saying there are still a few disconnects, and those would need to be addressed to deepen it. Thank you very, very much for that. I would like to go to Professor Odotte to ask about, of course, we've said that the missing link here is the governance link. Do you feel, with the promises that this manifesto has made, do you feel that the governance proposals are commensurate to the task at hand? Should we be excited, or do these look like quick or convenient platitudes to just pass? To let the document pass through. So, Professor Odotte, what are your thoughts on the governance proposals in terms of what are the strengths, what are some of the gaps? Thank you.
I think before going to the governance proposal, allow me to just make 2 comments on social transformation. I think, as colleagues have said, I like the fact that they have unpacked Article 43 of the Constitution and made tangible statements on what they will do on almost all the issues on social transformation. That is nice. There are just 2 things that I think I would have liked to see more. The 2 things I would have liked to see more, actually 3. One is on the women agenda. I don't know whether it's just me. I struggle to see the 2/3 gender principle and what they mean about it, either here or in the governance chapter. Maybe it's me who missed it. The second is the conversation on food security is spot on, but the title of that section says food security and nutrition. I think it's one thing to say we will have everybody having food, but it's about food of what value, the nutritive aspects of it. Today in the morning, a colleague was having the debate between maize vis-a-vis rice. I think the conversation about nutrition and the link between food security and health is something that I think I would have liked to see much more. The last one on social transformation is the conversations around labor relations. And when Steve was talking about the strategic plan he's doing for the Confederation of East African Trade Unions, YATUC, I thought he would also speak about the fact that if you look at that section, I think they ran out of ideas. We will reform policy, we'll reform laws. I don't see practically what they want to do in terms of labor relations, in terms of enhancing industrial harmony, in terms of ensuring that the rights of workers to go on strike vis-a-vis productivity is addressed. I don't see that, and I would have liked to see much more. Let's go to governance. As I said at the start, I think the recognition that the economic challenges we have a governance link is important. We cannot fix the economic problems of this country if we don't address questions of rule of law. I like the fact that they speak about the rule of law. We cannot address them if we don't make the judiciary to be a critical arm in the development process in terms of respecting court orders, in terms of ensuring everybody adheres to the law, in terms of ensuring the rule of law is what drives all our activities. And I like the fact that they make a statement around it. There's been a lot of conversations, especially amongst civil society, on Utu. What does it mean to be Kenyans? Our core values. How do we make Article 10 real? I think the commitment to ensure that we have progress on issues about Utu, for me, is something that at least, again, is laudable and something that is also nice. The other thing that is laudable is the conversation around devolution. I think the commitment to transfer 35% of resources to the county level is good. I think the commitment to transfer functions is good, but I think there's also need not just to transfer functions, but to ensure there's harmony. I think the duplication that continues to exist, both in terms of national and county government, must be addressed, and there should have been much more conversation around it. The need for us to be able to ensure that we address corruption at the devolved levels needs to be addressed. Enhanced service delivery. Today in the morning, a colleague of mine was telling me, if you want to be poor, provide services to county governments. Because you provide, you will not be paid. I think statements around that issue should also have been important in terms of how do we ensure that devolution continues to deliver the dividends and that the negative aspects of devolution are addressed in the aspect. So lastly, I think the statements on fighting corruption, on speeding the fight against corruption, strengthening the anti-corruption institution, for me, I think are laudable statements generally. So I think there is huge strides in the debate on governance. I have just two things that I think at the back of my mind, I wonder why they're not there. Number one, if we go back to social transformation in terms of my opening remarks, you see a whole subsection, Shiro 3.10 on faith-based organizations. And then you see huge silence on civil society organizations. You ask yourself, so where did the rain start beating civil society? That we see faith-based and critical things of what they're playing and nothing about civil society. That, for me, disappoints me in that section on governance, and I think it's something that is important to speak to. I think, lastly, for me, when the running mate was being appointed, I had the conversation that, we will make her the minister, the CS in charge of justice issues also, and we'll then address this issue, the tension between, is it implementation of the constitution, is it reform the constitution? I find a loud silence about that, and it worries me because I don't know what their position is now on that document, what they are thinking about, and it's important as a governance issue so that we know, because we then know what we will be able to hold them accountable. I see, though, that some of the proposals, like 7-year tax holiday, like 35%, have already been put into the manifesto. But as a document, do we get commitments that there will be a focus on ensuring the integrity of the constitution is maintained, that any conversations about reforms will be participatory, and that there'll be no mutilation? I would have liked to see an explicit statement on that, and I don't see that in the governance chapter. Thanks, Shiro.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now we are really out of time. As Tisa, one of our core values is public participation, and we are doing very poorly on that today. But I think when we have experts like yourselves in the room, sometimes it's our role to simply listen. But we do have maybe some 10 minutes in which I would ask Rosalia to give guidance. Rosalia, guide us. Who is going to share some of the questions to the experts, please?
Okay, thank you so much, Wanjiru. We have already gone through the chat, and we've gotten 2 comments from 2 different people. They're not really questions, they're more or less like additions. So I would want to just go through them. There is one from Adrian, says, Adrian, who was speaking on the manufacturing chapter, and he says that the opportunity, or rather the stroke battleground for the 2 major parties, stroke coalitions, to show their visions and interests was the 2022-2023 budget, since either will be implementing it now, and then he continues to say also down the line, the MTPs by Vision 2030. He continues to say that, in short, the only viable manufacturing future for the country is to become an assembly engine for the world by deregulating labor, environmental and financial laws. That is, so he's asking, is it then a race to the bottom? He compares also Kenya to the South Asian countries. The biggest difference the South Asian countries we like to compare Kenya to is that it was clear that if you enjoyed government protection and preferential treatment to create industries, you sabotaged it, you are either dead or rotting in prison. Industries can never be protected forever. He says free trade is not free. Then there's another comment from Edward Kakumu, where he says that is it time we agree that kickbacks and such forms of corruption are a menace and legalize them? It's actually a question. And then he says that we enrich then capitalism. And then he continues to say that we make 10% money back or finder's fee a legal and taxable venture, and then that this will allow such transactions to be done above the table. Both of them, those 2 are the comments that we've been able to get from the comment section. And so I think maybe if you would allow, we put out a question, anyone who wants to ask a question, they can raise their hands, and then maybe they can unmute, we can unmute them and let them ask the question to the panelists.
Thank you. As we await maybe one or two hands, because time's not on our side, I'll request, Reginald, did you get the question about the race to the bottom? Maybe, between these two political parties, you could speak to that. Then there is a question that I understood about this legalization of corruption so that we can manage it as one of the innovations on how to deal with endemic corruption. That's what I gathered from that, but if there was anything else, then the panelists can respond. And in the meantime, Rosalia, please could you get someone to drop a copy of the manifesto into the chats, the link into the chats. Thank you. Reginald?
Thank you. I don't think it's a race to the bottom. Neither do we need to assemble or become the assembly engine. We do not have the capacity to do that. Number one, we do not have the labor to be able to do that, because the labor mobility in terms of skill sets. Yeah, so if you want to come and assemble something here, you need people that are skilled in that area. And for you to get people that are skilled in that area, it might take a year or two to be able to get people that are skilled in that area. So retraining and redeploying your labor will not make sense. We have enough things to be able to do manufacturing here, especially revolving around agriculture. There's no point of trying to go to a high mechanization when we have a domestic demand from the things that we need currently as a starting point. If we then want to go bigger, the benefit of having the port of Mombasa is we know what Rwanda imports, we know what Burundi imports, we know what Uganda imports. We can then say Uganda are importing ball bearings. Are we able to provide for them ball bearings at a cheaper cost? But I think manufacturing as envisioned in this manifesto is to start manufacturing, looking at the resources that we have internally, using our labor here internally, and primarily just revolving around the agricultural blue, the blue economy and the livestock economy. That would be the best way of going manufacturing. If we want to start assembling cars for so and so, you'll find it doesn't make sense for Japan to ship parts for us to assemble here to ship them back to Asia and Europe. The cost just becomes ridiculous. So yeah, that will not be a viable option. Sure.
Dr. Omollo, would you like to add anything?
I think currently a lot has been said. One thing I would like to add, which I've seen particularly on the social part, which I'd raised initially, the manifesto has talked very well about the women agenda. But what I've seen with all documents and when you come to issues of gender mainstreaming, when women agenda stand on their own, they tend to get lost. So it is important they are integrated in all the components and not stand alone, because women issues don't act in isolation. That is one thing I think I would like to add, just building from the points that my colleagues have raised. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question that I'd like to throw to both Collins and Steve around, should we be thinking about finding ways to legalize kickbacks? I don't know if, yes, it's a question out there. What are your thoughts on this? And maybe the question really is the frustration with this. We may have very good ideas, but how do we ensure they don't get captured by patronage and those interests? So Collins, could you please go first, and then we could hear from Steve?
I know Edward Kakum, and since the last time I saw him, I think his ideas have become much more revolutionary than I thought. We cannot legalize corruption through whichever means. The day we do so, it's already bad enough that despite the fact that it is illegal, it seems to be the way of life. No wonder we are suffering the way we are. The day that we legalize it and say in our laws, you can actually carry it, Edward, we can as well pack our bags and go to some country and wait for the day Jesus is coming back. So I think the short answer is no, we cannot legalize. Having said so, I think it's important that we then ask ourselves, what are the practical measures by which we can fight corruption? And I think if you look at the document, they make a commitment to fight corruption, but I think there is need to unpack much more. How do we ensure that it stops being just a platitude and becomes practical? That's, I think, the place we need to go, but we cannot legalize it. That's my short answer to Edward Kakum, who is my friend.
Okay, thank you so much. Steve?
Thank you. I agree with Prof Odotte. You can't even think about legalizing corruption. It's like saying you want to legalize murder, you want to legalize shoplifting. You cannot do that. You can't even not think about it, leave alone doing it, in my opinion. But I have two matters I want to respond to. One, there was a question on whether the South Asian circumstance where growth jeopardized democracy is something we need to pay attention to, and I agree. I always wonder, the presidential candidate of Azimio keeps citing North Korea and South Korea and Malaysia, but I think it is clear that if you go back to the omelette and egg debate about human rights versus progress, South Asian countries have faced a serious contradiction. And where Kenya is now, and you saw in the way we defend our constitution, a balance would need to be attained. We cannot allow that we sacrifice democracy, human rights, because of progress. And it is possible to have the two concurrently. The binary that is often created is a false binary, because we also know that societies that are free make more progress. The second matter I want to talk to is there was a question about protection.
I have a question.
For how long can you protect your industries? And I think there's a book which is a
Yo,
very
I got a
book.
question.
The way there's a book written by Ha Jeon Chang. The title is Kicking Away the Ladder. And that book is a deep, nice history of of progress in many so-called industrial societies today, including China, the United States, India, Japan, and the UK. And the author illustrates how to incubate the industry, as Dr. Miriam had talked about that. They protected their sectors. And a good example, which is my last comment on this, is Kenya, when Jomo Kenyatta JKU Art was being built. The Japanese, at that time, ensured that even the rice that was served in the mess of JKU Art was from Japan. And remember, rice from Japan is subsidized at about 500%. Of course, unfortunately, they have violated the provisions of World Trade Organization. However, even the World Trade Organization provides a room within which you can offer subsidy for a certain time to insulate and spur growth in industry or even agricultural sector. So protection as a temporary measure is not a wrong thing. What is problematic is discrimination or the subsidy in a way that distorts the market. And I think it would be useful really for the Azimio to give an indication of how they'll do this. I think they've done it in talking about the Juakali sector, and I think it's a good thing. But we must go back to this argument by Jean Shang and say that we can't allow the West to kick away the ladder, which themselves they use toward progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists. I think we are reaching a point where we need to wind up. We won't take any questions by hand because it's a bit late in the day, and of course we are not able to control what comes out once we open those microphones. I'd like to give our panelists a final word as we close, and I'll take them, just ask, as we move towards the elections, the Kenyan voter out there is possibly wondering what can they do to ensure to hold their political leaders to account? Are these just empty promises? Maybe you could give us a last word on this. And maybe that might even spur the 16 or so % who are still sitting on the fence feeling like they're unlikely to vote for either side. So I know it's not an easy question, but please give us a last word on that and any other reflection you may have. So Reginald?
Thank you, Sho. I just want to read a quote from the leader of Singapore when they were turning around Singapore. He said, "A united and determined group of leaders backed by a practical and hardworking people who trusted them made it possible." And that was the answer he gave and was asked, how did they turn around Singapore? So even as people go out there to vote, as people read the manifestos, and I advise people read the manifestos, don't let people read for you on social media, but read the manifesto themselves. Then once you've read the manifestos and understood both manifestos, ask yourself, which set of leaders can you trust to actually implement what they have put in their manifesto? Looking at their track records, look at which set of leaders have said and have done, and which set of leaders have said and have never done, to help you make a choice, because manifestos are good, but if they're not going to be executed, and it takes a united group of leaders being followed by people who trust them for a manifesto to become a reality.
Thank you very much. Dr. Omolo, a final word, please.
Okay, for me, the question is just simple. For anyone who's reading the manifesto, just ask yourself, how is this improving my welfare? How will it make me a better person in terms of income, in terms of my health, in terms of my capacity? Just those 3 questions. What I'm still wondering, are these manifestos translated? Because not everyone is able to read. Or how are they being communicated again? That is another important question, especially someone who is even in the northern part of Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ouma, please give us your final word.
Thank you. So I think it's great that Azimio has given us a written manifesto. Allow me to make my comment based on the oral proclamations around the manifestos as well. I think for me, so far what I see is that the big political competitors seem to be questioning the role of the state in ensuring that the aspirations in the constitution are realized. And it seems that one group is saying that what we need is to do a balance between free market and the intervention of the state to ensure there's equity, there's justice, the non-discrimination, and those who have been left behind are sort of brought to the first pedals. So that giving people sort of the, as I said in the United States at the time, you know, they used to tell the black people to pull themselves up by their bootstrings. So it's about giving people the bootstrings. And it seems that the other competitor is saying, look, no, the problem is integration. Let's integrate everybody into the economy, that the economy has a place for everybody and some people are out. So I think for me, this is the basis. So it's economy, yes, but it's economy vis-a-vis how the state and government is able to mediate in accessing economic goods. In particular here, we're talking about, of course, Article 43 of the Constitution and other elements that people experience in their daily lives. So finally, for me, therefore, what people should look at, in my opinion, are 2 things. One, how does this manifesto align to the aspirations in the Constitution? Because I think the mega manifesto that we have for ourselves as a Kenyan people is the Constitution of Kenya. And any executive coming to office, in my opinion, should be able to progressively and firmly contribute to advancement in realizing what we have proclaimed to ourselves in the Constitution. And that, for me, would be the measure that I would use in making a decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Odotte. Thank you.
Initially, I was not being allowed to unmute myself. Now they have kindly agreed. So I have several things to say. The first one is for those who are undecided. Bad leaders are brought into office by good citizens who do not vote. By not voting, you're actually voting against the person that you think is the better of the candidates, of the 4 candidates that we have. So by heaven's sake, please vote. And part of that voting, don't vote based on your emotions. Vote based on your interest. And I think the manifesto that we've discussed today, the manifesto that will be released next week, and the other 2 manifestos that hopefully will also be released, give you an opportunity of asking yourself, like the Honorable Bifoli Wakoli used to ask, what about Bumula? You need to ask yourself, what about me? What about Kenya? The manifesto should be have an opportunity of saying, what do I see for myself? What do I see for my children? What do I see for my fellow citizens? What do I see for my country? Because this country cannot be left to whims. It must be based on some sound ideas. And I think a manifesto, an opportunity of asking ourselves, what about those ideas? But as the first speaker also said in his closing remarks, the ideas must also be accompanied by who will implement them. Do I trust them? Is their word their bond? Can they deliver on their commitments? Or are they just giving us sound bites? I think that's the third thing that is critical for us to keep in mind. The last one, which is a challenge for all of us, is the beauty of the pudding is in the eating. We must ensure that whoever it is who gets into power in August, we use that manifesto as a mechanism for tracking what they say. Because a lot of the times they tell us very good things, they overpromise, then they underdeliver, then 5 years down the road, they come back to make the same promises, forgetting that they promised. So we must hold these documents to account and develop a checklist, say, out of this, you have delivered this, you've delivered this, not delivered the other, so that we move ourselves into a conversation based on issues, into a conversation based on real deliverables, and not into a conversation based on marketing only. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Collins Odotte, Dr. Steve Ouma, Dr. Miriam Omolo, Reginald Kadzutsu. Thank you for sharing your amazing insights, your great knowledge with us, helping us unpack and understand the Azimio Manifesto deeper. I hope you'll be available when we call you to look at the KK Kenya Kwanza Manifesto, because we intend to also look at that one. Thank you also for the words you've given us, spurring us to action, asking us to vote, make sure we vote responsibly based on our interests, and to remain active and not expect that our leaders are going to perform unless we hold them accountable. Thank you to the Tisa team for putting this webinar together, to the communications team, to the programs team for the background work done. And in anticipation of the dissemination of this, thank you for that. So it brings us straight to time. I thank you for giving us your evening hours. I want to wish you all a wonderful, restful evening as we continue in this work, and wish you all the best with your respective assignments, and look forward to connecting and engaging soon. Have a good night. Thank you and goodbye.